tratan la distribución por macroprocesos, entonces el partido que no, 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 está bien.
¿Me vas a oír en las cabinas?
Está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Roll Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more...
Good afternoon to everyone who's here with us today in the Hall of the Americas and to everyone who is with us live online. Thank you very much for being with us and connected today. I am delighted to give a warm welcome to the private sector on the role of the private sector in the economic empowerment of women's strategies for women's labor insertion and addressing care as a structural barrier, organized by the CIM with support from the French government. And to open the event, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Alejandra Mora Mora, the Executive Secretariat of the CIM. Thank you very much, Beatrice. I would like to give a warm welcome to all of you. We as women have always been empowered in these spaces as we seek a way to grow. We need more men with us, but I do see a few of them out there. And I would like to give a very warm greetings to Celine Giusti. Welcome, Madam Ambassador, for being with us, and thank you very much for supporting everything that we are building here. I would also like to welcome Elizabeth Moreno, the dear Minister. We are certainly fans of yours, and thank you for sharing this space with us. To our dear Minister Nurka Palacios, the Minister of Women in Panama and Chair of the CIM, and other members of the CIM. I am very pleased to see you here at Beatrice, dear ambassadors who are always with us, as well as all of our allies and partners who have been working in order to frame these conversations. Just a few welcoming words. When we talk to women of the region, and I see all of my dear friends from Central America who are working around that territory, we know that what women are telling us is that they need acknowledgement for the work that they do. They need money in their purse in order to achieve independence and autonomy. And the Inter-American Commission on Women in this House of All of Our Rights has been calling on women's economic rights. as well as economic empowerment or autonomy, independently of however you call it. What we have been discussing here is women's needs, the fact that they need to be able to have resources in order to build the kind of life where they are in charge of their own destiny. And so part of this path means overcoming obstacles along the way, but we also have many achievements. So we will be talking today about structural obstacles such as care. And of course, we've been talking about care for millennia, and only now are we talking about the fact that this disproportionately falls on women's shoulders. It has an impact on companies' quality of life and states' ability to grow. And so these are the conversations we will be having today. Conversing with women means to humanize the world. This is a humanizing topic, and that is why we celebrate our partnerships with all organizations that are with us today and working alongside us. And so thank you so much, Beatriz, and I will give you the floor.
Gracias, secretaria.
Thank you, Secretary, for your warm welcome. And now we will invite Ambassador Giusti, the permanent observer of France to the Organization of American States, to give us her opening remarks. Thank you very much, Beatriz, Alejandra, dear colleagues, ambassadors, dear panelists, participants in today's event. I am privileged and proud to take part today in this very important event on the role of the private sector in women's economic empowerment. And a French attorney who dedicated her life to the feminist cause said that whether being economically independent is a basic rule, that is the key to independence, the foundation of women's liberation, the exit from a society that has set women back for far too long. Economic independence is the driver for greater political inclusion, social, professional, and cultural inclusion of women as well. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, made gender equality one of the tenets of his government since 2017, and the national cause of his first term was fighting against gender-based violence. And in his second mandate since 2023, he has been working to make equality in the economic, social, and professional worlds a reality. In the French National Assembly, we have been developing many policies to fight gender inequality in all areas, and particularly in the workplace, because access to employment is sine qua non to promote women's economic independence. France adopted a plan of action 2021-2024 for professional equality, and that includes 4 key laws, including the RICSA law, which establishes a 40% quota for women in leadership positions in large companies by 2030. But I'm not going to get bogged down in the details on the various measures being implemented by the French government, because today we are lucky enough to be here with Elisabeth Moreno, who was the Minister of Gender Equality, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity in France, and who also had experience in the private sector. She will be sharing with us her perspectives on economic empowerment of women, as well as the challenges and success stories that we've seen in France. What I can do is give you a tangible example of these changes in the workplace through the changes that I have seen in my own professional career. The French Ministry of Foreign Affairs has just adopted a plan of action for gender equality in the workplace. With this plan, we are committed to training all civil servants and raising their awareness of the fight against stereotypes, that's a hard word to say in Spanish, and promoting professional equality. The plan also promotes various salary differences being measured between men and women in order to be more effective in the way we combat this problem. But at the end of the day, we are supporting a fundamental objective that the French government has imposed on ministries, which is to reach 40% female nominations in leadership positions. In my ministry, we have been trying to achieve that threshold, and I'm a living example of these policies. I am a young female ambassador, and I'm taking advantage of this quota law, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. And I'm not ashamed to say that maybe I'm here because of a quota. France has also been integrating gender equality in all of our foreign policies, reducing inequalities and promoting sustainable development, peace and security, defending and promoting fundamental rights, fighting climate change, and overcoming economic challenges. Because this is a commitment that we can only make a reality if we prioritize gender equality as a cross-cutting factor in all of our foreign policies. And since 2017, we have been promoting a feminist diplomacy agenda, which aims to defend and promote women's and girls' rights at the heart of all of our activities. For example, France supports over 1,000 feminist organizations in 75 countries through a special fund. Against this backdrop, we can say that I feel very proud to support the CIEM's activities. The CIEM is the multilateral feminist organization that's the very oldest of its kind in the world. It just celebrated 100 years, and it is a pillar of the Inter-American system to promote women around the continent. We work with the CIEM to support activities aimed at training women in the framework of policies, and we carried out a very wonderful course in Colombia. We'll be holding another one in Ecuador very soon. But we also staunchly believe in the importance of women's political participation, although we also know that it's essential to strengthen our presence in the workplace. That is why the French project promoting CIEM includes drafting and promoting a model inter-American law on labor integration, and that law will certainly become a useful tool to improve economic guarantees for women nationally and at the inter-American level. Strengthening the legal framework around women's economic rights is an essential step for overcoming structural and social barriers that we face. This is a fundamental condition if we are going to guarantee women's independence. And I hope that today's conversations will help this project and bear fruit that allow women around the continent to aspire and emancipate themselves. Thank you very much, Alejandra, for your inspiring work, your great support, and I hope that our cooperation will continue to prosper in the future. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Justi, for your words and above all for the support from the French government for our work at the CIEM. We will close this opening session with a video and words from Yurka Palacios, the former Minister of Women in Panama and President of the CIEM.
Buenas tardes, distinguidas y distinguidos.
Good afternoon, dear permanent representatives and alternate representatives of member states, of countries, members of the OAS, observers, executive secretariat of the CIEM, experts from around the world, private sector and civil society representatives, high-level authorities, ladies and gentlemen. Warm greetings to on behalf of the Panamanian president and myself, the president of the Inter-American Commission of Women and Minister of Women in Panama. I am honored to be with all of you at today's event, and the CIEM invites all of you to address one of the most relevant topics for the Inter-American agenda on human rights of women, as well as gender equality: the role of the private sector in economic empowerment of women. Our work here has a very clear goal of moving forward in the working world, not only to include women, but to provide them with real opportunities and significant participation. In today's meeting, our main goal will be to address the situation of women in the working world and hold an open, collaborative dialogue on various strategies that are already effective for women's economic integration, and sharing best practices and experiences with the private sector. To reflect on necessary concrete actions in order to address the issue of care, which is a fundamental barrier faced by women, and to develop professionally on equal footing. Shared responsibility does not only mean sharing tasks related to care, it also means addressing the impact that care has on economic development of the entire society. We need to address shared responsibility of care duties, and this involves a set of actions and principles that seek to strengthen the role of care in empowering women and creating a working environment that is inclusive. This has been established by the SIM and its ministers for the 2022-2026 plan, in which they created a roadmap for strengthening the legal framework around women's economic rights in order to draft concrete recommendations of instruments and other tools aimed at strengthening women's protection and guarantees of these rights. We have been working on this area, addressing care in particular as an obstacle to women's full economic participation on equal footing in the working world and in productive life. We have also been working on model regulations to promote women's economic integration and independence. In this sense, the private sector has a fundamental role to play in women's economic inclusion, which is not only an issue of access, but also a powerful strategy for development. Many different industries confirm that when women have access to opportunities and equality, companies flourish and economies grow stronger. Communities are also able to improve their standards. This is not only the right thing to do, it's also profitable. That is an essential factor for sustainable economic growth. However, in order for this economic empowerment to truly be transformative, we need to address one of the most persistent barriers, which is, again, care. This leads to inequality in responsibilities in the household and leads to barriers to women's access to opportunities. It's essential for us to seek for care to be an essential part of our economy, and that we build practices and policies that promote shared responsibility. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve full inclusion. In that sense, the OAS and SIM has also been promoting regulations to promote shared responsibility in care, above all among members of society. Today, we will be working with a guide including measures to promote shared responsibilities in companies. That is why we are inspired to see increasing numbers of companies committed to building inclusive working environments that promote inclusion. Today, we have an opportunity before us to address these strategies, to address the gender gaps, and take advantage of women's full economic potential by promoting shared responsibility of care as part of our business responsibility. Thus, we will be able to change the working world and build an inclusive economy that addresses all of our needs. Thank you very much for being with us and for your dedication to working alongside us at the SIM. I am certain that what we do today will be a valuable contribution to promoting gender equality and women's economic empowerment. Thus, as the draft regulations that we have been working on at the OAS SIM, we aim to move forward toward a more equitable, prosperous, and fair society for all. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to our president of the Inter-American Commission of Women. It is an honor for the OAS team to have today the keynote address at this event by Madam Elizabeth Moreno, the ex-Minister of Gender Equality, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity in France. Elizabeth Moreno.
Business leader, former minister, and advocate for gender equality and diversity. Born in Cape Verde and raised in France, she holds a master's in business law and an executive MBA from ISEC and Mannheim. Moreno co-founded a thermal rehabilitation company in 1990 and later held senior roles in tech companies, including CEO of Lenovo France and a leadership role with Hewlett-Packard Africa. Appointed in 2020 as Minister for Gender Equality, Diversity, and Equal Opportunities in France, victims of domestic violence and conversion therapy, and promoted women's economic empowerment. She also launched a national platform against discrimination and introduced a diversity and inclusion index for companies. You can read her full bio in the link we have provided. Without further introductions, I offer you the podium for the keynote address.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. How are you? Good. And I think that we have a few people here who are viewing from afar. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone who is here with us today. This is a special moment for me because talking about the topic that we will talk about today is not just something technical for me. It is something that touches the lives of millions and millions of women. And I think that everyone together has a moment perhaps to try to make a real impact in the lives of all of these women, all of these girls who dream of a different life through economic emancipation and who think that all of you here today in this room can have an impact on their lives. Distinguished authorities, ministers, ambassadors, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here as part of this OAS event about the economic empowerment of women. One thing that I need to say is that my Spanish is so-so, but it's important for me to do this speech in Spanish. And before anything else, I would like to give a big thanks to our friend Alejandra Mora Mora, the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women. I met Alejandra in Paris when I was a minister, and I think that our hearts touched and will always have a warm relationship. I'd also like to thank Céline Justa, our beloved permanent representative of France at the OAS, for her participation in this event with regards to the oldest multilateral feminist organization in the world. It's a real pleasure for us to have you here. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you to talk about my experience with regards to a crucial cause for us, which is ensuring that women can achieve their full economic and social potential by contributing in an active way in equal conditions to the development of our society. Because the topic about which we're going to talk today is not just about Latin American countries. This is something that concerns the entire world. And I want to begin by emphasizing a fundamental truth. The economic emancipation of women is the best way to protect them against all forms of violence, be it domestic violence in the workplace or in society. When women have financial independence and have access to opportunities, including the necessary tools to escape from abusive situations and command respect, empowering women in economic ways, not just a social justice issue, but is also about protection and safety. Today, I want to talk to you about a topic that has been and continues to be the reason for many debates and transformations, the implementation of laws as a way to increase gender equality in spheres of power, be it economic, political, etc. I also want to share with you a few of proposals from our experience in France so that public policies can become tools for economic empowerment for all women. And first of all, let's reflect on the quota law. Quota laws came about as a direct response to historic exclusion of women in politics, in business, and in society. Upon establishing a minimum percentage of female representation in decision-making roles, quota laws look to find a balance for access to power for women in spaces that are traditionally dominated by men. There is a saying that women do not lack willpower or skills. What we lack is direct, secure, and concrete access to opportunities. For example, in many countries in Latin America, such as Argentina or Mexico, the adoption of quota laws has allowed for a significant increase in women in legislative areas or in leadership positions. However, despite these advances, we still continue to face important challenges. Quotas are seen as a ceiling as opposed to a minimum, and there are still cultural barriers that limit real access and effective access of women to power. It is necessary for quota laws to be strengthened and to adapt to the reality of each one of your countries. It's not enough to establish a percentage of representation. It is necessary to monitor, evaluate, and continuously adjust their implementation. We also need to promote sanctions for those who don't want to comply with these laws in order to respect gender diversity. Now, let me share the challenges that we still need to overcome in order to implement these laws, because when a law for quotas is implemented in order to increase gender equality, I already know that you know that many important obstacles will arise that can impede their effective implementation. These come from different areas because these professional structures, family structures, and social structures are deeply rooted. I'll start with the resistance of partners and professionals. Especially in the business world, this can be manifested in terms of resistance to quota laws. I have seen this when I was working in the ministry. Some fear that this measure imposes restrictions when it comes to hiring and limits flexibility in management. It's not true. We have seen it in France when we implemented these quota laws that have allowed us to advance from 10% of women in boards to 47% in less than 10 years, quota laws work. Often, professionals are accustomed to power structures dominated by men. And listen to me, I don't have anything against men, okay? I've got nothing against men. I have something against a system that keeps women from, how might you say it, from reaching their full potential. And some people, and they're always men, can see these quotas as a threat to the established order or as an imposition that is an attack on meritocracy. The problem is that women deserve just as men do. And if I use France as an example, there are girls who study and who have diplomas just like the men, but when they go to these businesses, thank you very much, there is a glass ceiling that doesn't allow them to advance in their careers. That is the true problem. I also want to talk about gender stereotypes and social traditional norms that are deeply rooted in many cultures. This social resistance is often unconscious, which believes that these quota laws are in some way artificial or even unfair. Some can see this measure as a superficial equality that doesn't take into account the skills or competencies which feeds upon stereotypes with regards to women in different areas. I am sure that you have heard about these situations where people say, oh, you're here because you are a woman and you got here through the quota, which is a direct attack on our competencies, our skills, our diplomas, and all of the experiences in life that we can share with society. I now want to talk about biases and persistent prejudices within the family world, within businesses and within communications media, which has a real impact. It's essential that we carry out a deep fight against biases, prejudices, and stereotypes in society. Gender inequalities have their roots in infancy, in our families, and they are perpetuated in school, in communications media. We need to talk about the way women are treated on social media. Then we see it in the professional life. When families continue to transmit rigid gender roles, if companies do not commit themselves actively to promoting diversity, and if the media perpetuate gender stereotypes, legislative efforts won't be enough to change society in a lasting way. In summary, we need a comprehensive strategy. These quota laws should be accompanied by a mindset shift that is much broader, which is not just about women. And I want to thank the men who are here with us today, because the role of men in this societal change is absolutely necessary. Gender equality is not a fight between women and men. It's a fight for all of society to be better, because when a woman has it good in her family has it good. And when a woman has these opportunities, her performance in the business where she works is much better. This quota law for everyone is important, and I would say it's crucial to establish educational programs to raise awareness of gender stereotypes starting at an early age, training leaders and recruiters in diversity management and promoting inspiring feminine models. And Alejandra, when I discovered this extraordinary space, I walked around this space where I hadn't been in such a long time, and I saw that there was no representation of women. And when a female student comes here to participate in a conference, if she doesn't see representations of women here, she can't imagine a day in which she might be here, like Alejandra or Sonia or Celine or all of you who are here. Representation is very important. And for all of you who have walked down this passageway, we now have galleries of heroes and heroines, because it's important to have both of them in order to build a fairer, durable, and more desirable world. I really believe that education is the mother of all transformations, and I also believe that it is through combating these biases at all levels, in the family, in businesses, in public institutions and private institutions, and in the media, is how we will really be able to achieve a tangible equality. We also need to propose solutions for economic empowerment through public policies. While the quota law is an important step towards this, we need to advance towards public policies which economically empower women at all levels. Here, I will share a few key recommendations from the experience that I have from the private sector and the public sector. Salary inequalities continue to be a barrier for economic empowerment of women. We need to propose laws that ensure transparency with regards to salaries and which sanction discriminatory practices in companies. This is fundamental for equality. In countries such as Iceland, there have been standards implemented which require businesses to demonstrate that they are complying with salary equality, which can inspire us for our own context. And we have also done this in France, when President Macron decided that equality between men and women would be the great cause of his administration. And the second important thing would be that he supported female entrepreneurship, because there are many women who have innovative ideas and the potential to create businesses, but they lack access to financing and support networks. Public policy should include financing programs specifically aimed at women who are entrepreneurs. And this also includes training with regards to business and technology. For example, in France, the female equality guarantee allows entrepreneurial women to facilitate their access to credit. Without money, no one can do anything. And women always have greater difficulties with accessing funds than men do. Studies prove this every day and everywhere in the world. Another thing is promoting education and training in strategic sectors. Women should have access to education and training in high growth areas such as technology, science, and engineering. Public policy should encourage the inclusion of women and children and girls in STEM programs starting in elementary school in order to reduce the gender gap in the sectors which are dominated by men today. Another idea is the implementation of mentorship programs and support networks. Creating mentorship programs for women in political and business areas can be an effective tool for developing their careers. I have taken advantage of this. I have had both male and female mentors who have shown me paths that I didn't imagine were possible for myself. This is very important. And the experience of women in leadership positions can help new generations to navigate challenges and open doors in sectors where women have historically been underrepresented. To conclude, a key factor for empowering women is the creation of policies that allow them to find a balance between their work lives and their family lives, because women cannot choose between being businesswomen and being women and being mothers and taking care of their families. And that is why it is fundamental to recognize that caring for a family should not be solely the responsibility of women, and that it is a shared responsibility. Finally, in order to build a society of care and respect, this is important. Gender equality can't be achieved solely through policies and laws. We need to build a culture that values the participation of women in every level and in every sector. This involves a mindset shift in both men and women so that together we can build a fairer, more inclusive, and more resilient future. It is absolutely essential that our governments, our companies, and our institutions work to create policies and programs to close the gender gap, and that they generate a deep cultural shift. When women have the same opportunities for development as men, and when their voices and talents are recognized and valued in all sectors of society, is when this will become a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at a fundamental point in time with a responsibility to build a society in which everyone, regardless of their gender, has the same opportunities to grow, to contribute, and to transform the world. We're talking about millions of dollars in our world economy at a moment of high inflation. Quota laws and public policies can be powerful tools in this effort, but their effectiveness depends on our constant and collective commitment. However, we should remember that laws alone are not enough. It's necessary that we have a strong commitment to public powers for guaranteeing that these laws are implemented effectively and that they are applied with the necessary rigor. It's only in that way that we can ensure that female empowerment is not just a goal, but also a reality that enriches our societies and strengthens our economies. Let's take advantage of this opportunity to continue advancing all together to build a future in which gender equality is a tangible reality and not just a promise, so that the girls who are born today don't have to fight the same battles that we're fighting today to transform the world. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Minister Moreno, for your inspiring words, for all of your recommendations, and for a pathway for us to follow. Thank you very much. We have a little bit of a delay, but we can dedicate between 5 and 10 minutes. If anyone has a question or would like to talk to the minister, now would be the time if anyone would like to ask any questions. The first question is always the hardest.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Milton, and I wanted to ask you, when you talk about gender-based policies for integrating women, if you are also including sectors that are not traditionally considered female sectors, such as the LGBT community, as this is a different category in some minds. So when you talk about quotas, are you also considering transgender populations who are now would become part of women? Thank you very much for this question. It's a very interesting question because I have spent my entire life in very masculine sectors. I began my career as an entrepreneur in construction. Then I spent 20 years working in technology. Then I worked in policy, and I am very familiar with the difficulties that women who work in technology face. We have less than 30% of the people working in technology are women, and especially in artificial intelligence. And this is changing the world. Less than 15% of the women who work in this, of the people who work in this sector are women. And this is serious because we are building a world much more quickly. When I was working in the ministry, we carried out a campaign called there's jobs do not have a gender. Gender is a biological reality, but there is nothing today that is stopping a woman from doing a job that is known as masculine, and nothing is stopping a man from doing a job that is considered feminine. It's just mindsets and cultures that are doing this. So we worked with national education, with companies in the automobile industry, etc., to show that women who work in those sectors, even if there's very few of them, they have success. And the problem is that it's a very long effort because we have to rebuild this perception of the world that we have as both women and men. So I think that your question is very interesting because it shows how we are very far and how we need to work on education from an early age to explain to our children that no job has a gender. Is that a good answer?
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I am Ilenia Ramirez. Thank you very much for this inspiring argument, and I think that it really hits all of us right in the heart because you really speak from the heart. My question is related to the quotas. When I came to study in this country, I also believed that I was a quota. I strongly suspect that I was. I suspect it, and I'm saying so proudly because I think it's also important for women. But I think that sometimes these quotas can become a liability for us. And so my question is, and we have seen all of this, we know that people need to be aware of how we reach the positions we do, and how do we mitigate those quotas becoming a liability for a process, saying, okay, here are women, but maybe not the best representatives of this awareness and these conversations. How can we avoid this becoming some sort of a pitfall or an avalanche with no return? I don't know if it's not a very popular opinion. I do believe in quotas, but I think that it might turn into a liability that turns back on us. Thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your words. Men have benefited from invisible quotas their entire lives, their whole lives. It's an invisible quota, but it is a mental quota, and it works very well. If you ask society, men or women, close your eyes and tell me, what's your best example of a leader? Who do you think they have in mind? Their entire lives, men have benefited from invisible quotas. For a woman to be considered as a quota, she has to be much more capable than any man ever was. This isn't a problem if you're a quota. The problem might be if you don't do anything with the power that you hold in your hands. I don't care if you were a quota. What I do care about is that all of the opportunities to show what power is to everyone, what skills are, what means to have inclusive management actually make a difference. In any case, whether you do well or not, you will be more heavily criticized as a woman than any man. You see politics, a man can make 10,000 mistakes, and a woman will be just assassinated for the very first mistake she makes. So you understand what I'm saying? Criticized isn't strong enough. No. You see, she's not good at what she does. She's not in the right place. She should go home and take care of the kids. No. You all know things like this. You're all aware of it. So the problem is that if we don't do away with laws, we will never, ever be able to see real change in this situation, because even with laws in place, the situation changes at such a slow pace. So just imagine, without any laws, you don't have any tools available to you to say, this is what I deserve. I also think that I want to show what I can do. So you shouldn't be worried about being a woman who's here because of a quota. In any case, everyone who is recruited for a single reason, and that's because they are intelligent, because they have a lot of skills, they have expertise in something. If they hire you because you're a woman, that's fair, because we have waited so long for this moment. Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation and for this very enriching space. And now we will move on to the first panel, which is exchanging best practices for women's integration in the workplace. And first, we will hear from Ambassador Giusti to open the first panel, and then I would ask the panelists to please come on stage. We are here with Cindy Quesada, who is the Minister of Women in Costa Rica, who will be with us virtually. Karina Lupica, who's a Senior Specialist in the Gender and Diversity Division at the IDB. Natalia Mazzoni, who is a Specialist in the Women in Business and the Law Program at World Bank. And Ana Elena Chacon, who's a Senior Public Policy Advisor for Oxford University. Patricia Elisa Rivera, the Director of Incidents, Vital Voices Global Partnership, and Maria Claudia Camacho, the Executive Secretary for Integral Development of the OAS SETI. Thank you very much, and I'll give the floor to the Ambassador.
Hola.
All right, now it's working. So it is a great honor to moderate this panel, but I had planned on saying a lot of things, but I think that the introduction from Elizabeth and the first questions that we heard were actually a very good segue to this topic, because we are here to discuss seeking strategies for women's labor integration. And I think that we have already spoken about this in the region and around the world. Many women of working age are actually not part of the working world, and this is due to their family obligations, and that comes from the IOL. And women talk a lot about caring for elderly parents, family members, children, and also, I think these are stats from the SIM itself, that the pandemic highlighted and exacerbated these figures even further. But we have also talked about this with Elizabeth. Sustainable economic development in a country will only become a reality if we have a fair, equitable society for women. And so here we have a problem on our hands. We need to find a way to find tangible measures, whether from the public or private sectors, to look at what we can do in order to promote women's labor integration, to break down that glass ceiling that prevents us from holding high-level responsibilities, or perhaps simply having a job, how to guarantee equality and better support female entrepreneurship. I think that some of these questions are what this panel is going to try and answer. But before we get to the solutions, we need to look at the situation in our region. And the exchange that we're holding today with these outstanding experts from various areas in the public and private sectors. We will be hearing from their experiences, and that will help us all to reflect on how, from the private and public sector, we can work to strengthen and guarantee women's empowerment. This is a very broad topic, and I think that at the outset we need to understand a snapshot of the situation, and that is why we are lucky to be here with three very high-level panelists from different areas. First of all, I would like to hear about the labor situation of women in the regional context, and so we will hear from Maria Elena Chacon, Ana Elena Chacon. Here she is, and she will be presenting the situation in the regional context today. She is the Vice President of Costa Rica, Minister of Security of the Republic in 2006, and she is a international relations specialist specialized in human rights and public policy, and now a public policy advisor for Oxford University. She will be presenting a snapshot of this context, and then we will hear about obstacles and challenges that women face in the working world from Karina Lupica, who's a senior specialist in the Gender and Diversity Division of the IDB. And she will be sharing with us her experience because she works on initiatives aimed at socioeconomic inclusion of women and diverse populations, while also supporting the integration of a gender and diversity perspective in the IDB's social protection and health operations. And then we will conclude that part with Natalia Massoni, who is a specialist from the private sector on the Women, Business, and the Law project from World Bank, where she studies the impact of the pandemic on women's labor participation and legislative gaps at the regional level when it comes to women's incorporation for full economic participation. And then we will have a very rich snapshot from various perspectives, and then we will be looking at how we can address these challenges. And then, and this of course is our objective today, we will work to exchange best practices and strategies that can be shared with all countries of the region. So for this exchange, we are delighted to be with Cindy Quesada Hernandez, who is the current Minister of Women in Costa Rica. She has been in that position since 2022, and she coordinates the interinstitutional policy on gender and continuous work to promote full enjoyment of rights, and she will be sharing Costa Rica's example of public policies as well as successful measures aimed at incorporating women in the working world. And then we will hear from the NGOs. Thanks to Patricia Elisa Rivera, who's the director of the issue advocacy team at Vital Voices Global Partnership. And then we will conclude the roundtable with a multilateral perspective with a presentation from Ms. Maria Claudia Camacho, who's the head of the Labor and Employment Section at the OAS Executive Secretariat for Integral Development, SETI, at the Organization of American States. I hope that I have introduced all of you. Is there anyone that I missed? Wonderful, because I'm always afraid when I'm presenting people that I might have forgotten somebody, but I'm sure that this will be an excellent opportunity for all of us to share best practices, visions, perspectives, and offer valuable recommendations to move forward in promoting women's economic inclusion in the Americas. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our experts and panelists, and I think that we will begin with, who do we start with? I lost my spot. The minister. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me well. Can you hear me? Is the audio okay? Perfect. I will take this opportunity to speak about women's participation in the working world and incorporating them in our economies, which also involves entrepreneurship, access to resources, and in this case, we will specifically be talking about access to sources of employment and high quality employment. In Costa Rica, we have a robust public policy in place, as well as legislation to overcome challenges, but we do face difficulties like anywhere else, and I think that we have been able to accelerate some of the processes that might drive us to see the results that we hope to see. In Costa Rica also has two major public policies for equality, and that is part of various lines of action to promote high quality work, as well as a national law for preventing violence, which has an access that speaks about the challenges for discrimination and violence suffered by women, specifically in the labor sector. And often this prevents women from finding or remaining in a job. We will be addressing the issue of care, employment, professionalization of care, the issue of skills and training, incorporating women in STEM careers, which are much better remunerated, and also challenges related to discrimination and violence suffered by women. And so in that sense, I will share some of our strategies that we are implementing, starting with the national strategy for gender equality in the working world. And this is a strategy that is part of women's economic empowerment, and it seeks to support private companies and public institutions in achieving gender equality within their working centers and to create measures and plans to this end. It seeks to change the culture within organizations by building a business ethic that promotes women and men's empowerment and equality with various components to provide support and technical assistance by providing training that is remunerated, tactics aimed at working with organizations to ensure that they implement guides, both public and private, to promote equality, and best working practices on gender. And specifically because in Costa Rica we have been working with the business community, including SMEs, as part of these organizations to implement best practices that have been developed and providing support through our mechanisms, seeking to change the culture when it comes to human rights, strategic activities aimed at closing gaps. And this is a very clear will that we have seen from our organizations in improving experiences. And as part of that, we can talk about personnel management, recruitment and hiring practices, care, comprehensive health, prevention, and fighting violence against women in businesses, and also promoting gender equality in the value chain, for example. Other components include the Gender Equality Seal, which is a recognition that's provided to organizations that have gone through all of these steps, and we have a national standard that has been adopted since 2021 to promote gender equality in the workplace, and that involves 3 levels, bronze, silver, and gold. And it also allows companies to obtain fiscal incentives to include public various quotas and public policies. They can be recognized, therefore, for this effort, and it can be very valuable for many organizations to have this. We've been working to promote various programs to promote economic empowerment and employability of women, as well as promoting their labor human rights. This is a priority for our administration. And other strategies that we've been working on include closing the wage gap, and we've been working on this since 2019. We have special policies aimed at promoting gender wage equality, and we recognize the right to wage equality between men and women. This is public information. If they need the same pay for the same job, and we note that women should be paid the same for the same or equivalent jobs, and this is part of the instruments that we have been adopting. We look at our census figures to promote wage equality and recruitment based on zone, gender, or other characteristics, and to establish thereby that this is an interinstitutional commission aimed at promoting wage equality between men and women as part of the strategies that we have been developing in this commission, and that is raising awareness on the issue of remuneration, valuing work, including topics like this in collective bargaining agreements, promoting manuals for pay as well as career development for women's development, women's leadership positions, strengthening their decision-making power in the working world, and ensuring parity and equality to close these gaps. And additionally, it is important to mention that this is sponsored by the ILO, and the program is the result of a methodology aimed at identifying wage gaps and creating tools for the business world, as well as inspectors from the Ministry of Labor, to identify problems and recommend corrective actions. For others, it has been very important because it has led to real results in Costa Rica in strengthening women's position, as well as promoting an assessment process for companies in addressing this gap. And it is the result of a recommendation from the Commission. And in that sense, we have other strategies that we've been developing in the country, which are extremely important to mention. That includes our strategy for employability. At this time, we have 50% employment of women in it is currently at the lowest level in recent history, and we see that 40,000 women have in fact left their workplace because they have other priorities, and this needs to be addressed. We also see that we need to promote women's equality with men in working with STEM, telecoms, and this has allowed us to ensure greater participation and work from the Interinstitutional Commission to create spaces that are welcoming to young people. And obviously, for us, when we see cases like this, we see the national survey on the use of time, and we don't have exact figures. We need exact figures to create public policies. And right now, we can tell you that the Central Bank of Costa Rica has indicated and shed light on non-remunerated work as a massive obstacle to women's ability to work, and we are using these figures to create a response and have a public policy in our country based on all of this information, which will allow us to set our agenda for domestic workers so that we can address this population, promote their migration regularization, because often they are foreign women in Costa Rica who are carrying out these jobs, and they face a lot of discrimination. And so we need to have an intersectional approach when we address social security, workplace safety and security, as well as our tax service, so that we can professionalize this work and improve their employability, to promote their training, skill building, and professional development, to promote a culture of working rights, for example, vacation periods, a workplace free of violence, and strengthening for all organizations. And I would like to close by speaking about some major gaps when it comes to women's representation in the working world. Often they are busy providing care to other people, and in Costa Rica we have called on the National Institute of Women to come up with a proposal for care that we can use as a template to implement and create a new program for a pilot project next year in working with companies to promote the institutionality. We see the cost to public and private enterprises, and we see that work outside of the home should not be limited to only a certain class of people, but we need to promote women in transforming the workplace and aligning, reconciling the family reality and working responsibilities. And this is part of working with society through the labor sector and providing an opportunity, because we see that we can improve the situation through these programs and ensure that the government is able to finance 55% of care, which is very innovative as a program that we've been working on. And so we need to celebrate women's skills and regulations, promoting women access to STEM, providing assistance to mothers and caregivers so that they have the opportunity to go out and find a job through a model with a gender approach. We have a working group that has been working to create a template for building and transforming this business mindset. That's just some of the exercises that we have been carrying out as part of our gender roadmap in our ministry, and we hope to build the conditions of employability necessary so that women are able to have safe places to work, that we are able to acknowledge and value caregiving and give them a space to work without sexual violence or sexual harassment, and to ensure that they are able to keep their jobs in the working world. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Minister. Can you hear me? I couldn't see you, so I didn't know if you were done. So I think it's very important to have this vision and so many strategies like they do in Costa Rica, and that they share them with the entire continent, because this is excellent work that they've been carrying out for labor integration, and this is a great contribution to our panel. And now I will give the floor to Karina Lupica, who is from the IDB, and she will be speaking to all of us about barriers and challenges that women face in the working world. And now the minister actually started with the solution, so now we're going to talk about the hurdles that those solutions are for. So thank you very much and welcome. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be with all of you representing the Inter-American Development Bank at this meeting, and also thank you very sincerely to Alejandra Mora Mora, the Executive Secretary of the SEAM, and Ambassador Justi for this invitation. Now, please let me get started with some good news, and that is that women's labor participation has grown immensely in the last several years, and that is thanks to what we have been doing, and we are laying the groundwork for more, and thanks to many women's movements who've made this a possibility today. Women's working participation in the 60s was at 20%, and today that is 66%. It's a huge leap, and yet we are still very far from the 90 or 93% participation that we see among men. We have a gap of about 25%, and that is broader among women with less education. It's even 36% different, or between women who are indigenous or Afro-descendant, where it is over 30 percentage points as well.
When women are outside of the job market, as we have talked about, it puts the brakes on economic development in countries in the region, and there is a lot of literature that is saying that this has to do with the economies in which women participate. But it also has to do with an inefficiency in terms of allocating talent, because there are a lot more educated women than there are educated men. In the private sector, these gaps are also visible. For example, in Brazil, where 50% of Afro-descendant are involved in the labor market, Afro-descendant women are occupying 10% of different positions in different businesses, and they often occupy the lowest positions. These differences are even more visible when we talk about leadership positions. Women hold less than 4% of leadership positions, such as CEOs. They are very behind in terms of the boards of different private enterprises. And when we talk about the private sector, the public sector, we also find that we're behind. 50% of the job market in the public sector, 30% are women. Despite the advances that we have made, thanks to the quotas that we talked about and that Ambassador Moreno talked about just a little bit ago, the fact that there are fewer women in leadership positions is not just an impediment to individual professional development, but it's also an impediment to important decision making for advancing gender equality. When it comes to the wage gap, what's happening, this is a worldwide phenomenon. In Latin America and the Caribbean, women earn on average 12% less than men. Even if we make adjustments for experience and education level, this is an injustice. And despite the fact that there have been a number of measures implemented, we still have a long way to go. So how are we earning less even though we have these leadership positions? The first barrier that we face are gender norms and stereotypes, which come from the beginning of time. As the ambassador was saying, these ideas about gender, which get under the skin of these men, are keeping society from seeing us as people who are capable of occupying leadership positions and earning the same wage as a male CEO. In addition to being an injustice, it is also a barrier to wage equality, which would allow us to continue to advance. In our region, we see a lot of women who are the heads of their household. And if they have low income, it's very difficult for them to take their children, their families out of poverty. We are also carrying out polls which tell us that these variations from social norms are not changing at the velocity that we need them to. Regardless of gender, 50% of people believe that preschool-aged children or young children suffer if their mothers work. This would be the second barrier that we face, which are norms which have not only impeded the advancement of women with regards to private property, but it also affects them in their day-to-day lives. Natalia is going to talk a little bit about this, but there are a number of norms in the labor market which keep women from working in certain sectors, or which make them in charge of care. The third norm, and this is very linked to this, which is that women continue to play the role as the main caretaker in our homes. We do double the amount of unpaid care work as men in our day-to-day lives. And these gaps of labor participation due to care can be seen in two important moments. One is when children are born. There is a lot of literature that talks about how women are punished for being mothers in the labor market. But we also have studies that talk, for example, in Mexico, about when women care for their parents. And this is another way that we see this gap widening. The gap of labor participation grows in Mexico. Women leave the job market to care for children, but they also leave to care for their parents. There's a recent study from Chile that I love, which talks about how when parents have, for example, a disease like cancer, we can see that women, the daughters, work at a higher proportion with regards to care than sons. In a region which is aging at an accelerated rate. We also have shortages with regards to care. Now, I have a little bit time left, but I want to talk to you about a few specific actions that we are taking at the IDB to overcome these barriers. At the IDB, we are promoting the development and implementation of comprehensive care systems in our region. This is not just about increasing care services, but also about training women caretakers, talking about social norms that need to be changed, regulating the job market, and changing social norms so that men take greater participation in the care of their children and their parents. In July, we had a regional dialogue which Minister Quesada and other ministers participated, not just with regards to women's issues, but also with regards to social development and finance. Why is it important that we have these portfolios at the table? If we're not able to convince ministers of finance so that they allocate more money to care services, there's very little that we can do despite the advances in our own ministries, because at the end of the day, if we want to help more people and provide better quality, we need more resources. Otherwise, women will continue to be the cheap labor that fulfill this role in society. Another initiative that we are carrying out at the IDB, and it's good to mention it here because we're talking about the private sector, are gender equality initiatives. We've been carrying out these initiatives since 2012. We have 10 countries in the region that are part of these initiatives. These are public-private platforms that bring together high-level leaders to create plans of actions with concrete measures to achieve three key objectives: to increase female participation in the job market, to increase the number of women in leadership positions, and to reduce the gender wage gap. These are concrete actions. Last week, there was a practical guide that was launched to help companies with best practices and tools in order to comply with these goals. I invite you to take a look at this guide. And lastly, another great thing that I wanted to tell you about is that at the IDB, we are working a lot to change gender norms, which continue to control us with the stereotypes that we have with these patriarchal ideas in our society. So last year, we had a lovely publication talking about the role of men in gender equality at companies. We had more than 50 companies in the region involved, and we told them, we need you to join this effort. We're not alone. We need the other half. So that's another publication I invite you to read. I think I'm out of time, and I thank you very much for the invitation to participate. And we really celebrate these spaces for conversation among different sectors which are promoting the concrete tools that we can present, such as the inter-American care laws or different issues that we have with businesses. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Karina. I think that we're going to be able to use these concrete measures with regards to this topic. I'd like to continue with diverse perspectives, and we're going to continue with the World Bank. Natalia Mazzoni, who is a private sector specialist in the Women, Business, and the Law program. You have 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm going to speak in English if that's
much for having me here representing the World Bank and the Women, Business, and the Law project. And I really love a lot of the points that you brought to this discussion, and I feel that we aligned our talking points before we came here, but we didn't. So one of the things that I wanted to bring in terms of the impact of the pandemic on women's labor force participation speaks to a lot of the issues that have been brought here already. So what we saw when the pandemic hit, you can kind of summarize that in 3 main areas, and there's a reason why they've been calling the recession that came after the pandemic as a she-cession, so a recession that's really targeted women. So we saw first job losses of women that worked primarily in female-dominated sectors, right? So we saw how women working in hospitality, in care work, in retail sector, we saw the drop in female labor force participation in those sectors due to the nature of those jobs. You can't really work remotely from those jobs. So in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, we ended up seeing that effect. But on the other hand, the women that could actually go home and work remotely, we saw an effect that Karina, you touched on, which is increasing the burden of care work and increasing the double journey that women face already working their full-time jobs, but also caring for children, for the elderly, for sick relatives, and other types of care that women tend to perform in comparison to men. And also we saw the effects of exposure to gender-based violence, right? And that doesn't happen only based on partners, but non-partners as well. So these, I would say, 3 main effects of the pandemic on women really impacted their ability to join and stay in the labor market. But when we think about those factors, they don't happen in a vacuum. That we can think about them in isolation. These are all, they speak to challenges that women have been facing throughout their lives, and that's something that several of you already touched on your remarks today. Challenges throughout their work life, but also family life, existing in society, their mobility patterns, all these aspects impact women's ability to exist in society, contribute to the labor market. So barriers to even enter and access the labor market. We see there are countries where there are outright prohibitions in the law that tell women you cannot work in these economic sectors, that are industries that women can even access. There are also the issue of having shorter careers or entering the labor market later, the motherhood penalty, in the sense that there are countries that don't even provide for paid leave for women. So what do you do when you have children? Gender-based discrimination, equal pay, which is another area that's been touched already, and gender-based violence as kind of the stepping stone for everything that women can do, right? Like if you're not protected from violence, there's nothing you can do in terms of existing in society, joining the labor market. But in this context, I think I can turn to the research that we do at the World Bank with the Women, Business, and the Law project. And I always like to carry a copy of our report just to show the cover of the report. And so this project is a report that's been going on at the World Bank for the past 15 years. Our first report came out in 2010. And over the past 15 years, we've been looking at how the laws or the lack of laws impact women's ability to thrive in society, to join the labor market, and to be empowered economically. And in this year's report, we published our 14th edition of the report in March 2024. we found that across the 10 domains that we cover, so we cover what we call indicators, and we follow the life cycle of a woman from issues of violence and safety to mobility, opening their own businesses, joining the labor market, all the way to retirement. Across these 10 domains and in all 190 economies that we cover, women have only 2/3 of the legal rights that men have. That is because when we look at this, the index that we have questions that look at aspects of the legislation of all 190 countries that we cover to see how the law treats women in terms of equality, in terms of affirmative actions, in terms of benefits provided by the law. So we find that the gap of legal rights is really prominent around the world. But maybe we can zoom into Latin America to give some concrete examples that speaks to a lot of the topics that you all brought today. So I can bring some examples related to women's safety. In 16 out of the 32 countries in Latin America, the law doesn't fully protect women from sexual harassment. And that's just not in employment. It's in public spaces, into education, transportation, online, which is now a very modern type of violence that we've been observing. The issue of equal pay. We see that in 21 countries in Latin America, the law does not provide for equal pay for work of equal value in the standard of the International Labor Organization. So that's still an area that needs a lot of work in terms of regulatory frameworks. We also see a very important gap in terms of maternity leave, the paid leave for mothers. 18 countries in the region still have leave for mothers that are under the standard of 14 weeks, which is 98 days. And there's been a lot of studies showing how long or how little is beneficial for women to have paid leave. There's not a consensus, but the standard from the International Labor Organization is 14 weeks or 98 days. The same doesn't exist for fathers. So there isn't an international standard for what is the leave that we should aim for fathers. So the variation across the world is really wide. But in Latin America, what we see is that of the 17 countries that have some form of paid leave for fathers, most offer 2 days to 1 week, with some up to 2 weeks. So when we think about sharing the care and sharing the care duties in the home, how can we do that if fathers have 2 days of paid leave? I mean, I see in this room, the majority here are women. If you've ever given birth, you know that 2 days is nothing. You may be 2 days in labor. So what does that mean for participating in the care and in the household? And lastly, as a result of all this, there's a huge childcare crisis. So in terms of legal frameworks that provide for the availability, the affordability, and the quality of childcare. So we see that that's also a huge gap. Now, all these laws may be in place, but their effective implementation is also an issue, and that's something that we look in the report. When we report that 2/3 of the legal rights exist, in terms of implementation is way less, it's 2/5 of the mechanisms to effectively implement these laws that are in place. So it's impossible to think about barriers and regulatory barriers and not think about what comes next. What's the next step? What concrete actions should exist so these laws can translate into the outcomes that we want to see for women? And also we can't disaggregate this from gender norms, right? Because it's a cycle. Gender norms can impact the way the laws are drafted, the way the laws are passed, but also these laws have the potential to change gender norms as well. So there are several ways that we can continue working on this. I think having the model law is a great initiative for us to gather all this knowledge and good practices and share experiences so we can have something to look up to. And there are several still gaps in terms of international standards, so maybe that's a good way of doing it. And encouraging more women in decision-making and leadership positions is attached to better laws for women as well. So I think there's several things that we can continue doing together to make this happen. And I really thank you for the opportunity of discussing a little bit of the work that we do. And I encourage everybody to read the report, maybe look up the score for your own countries. And thank you so much for having me.
I think, yeah, we need laws, and we need to implement the laws we have.
Yeah.
Sí, sí.
Okay. Gracias.
Thank you. I was going to have my third panelist take the floor. That is Madam Ana Elena Chacon. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to share this panel with you and to learn from you. But I also wanted to thank Alejandra Mora Mora for bringing us together to fight this fight, which keeps us all united. If I'm repeating myself, it's not because I want to be repetitive. It's because we are facing a lot of the same issues. I have a few graphics that I know they're not projecting, because when we talk about promoting wage equality, this is a topic with regards to justice. What this means is that this has to do with the social progress of our countries. This means that we have seen changes in the last 4 decades. There is a change with regard to the economically active population. With regards to women, we have surpassed 80 million women who have entered the job market in Latin America and the Caribbean. 3 decades ago, we only represented 35% of the economically active population, but there remains a gap of 35 percentage points. So it's up to us to look at what we're doing from the University of Oxford. What this is doing is talking about what are the concrete data that we have. Then we can look with an honest eye at what the reality is. And we can see that in the regional context, we have advanced from 1980 to 2019. We have increased the number of women who are in the labor market, and this has to do that this means that we're going to face new challenges. This could have to do with civil rights. This could have to do with living free from violence, or this could have to do with how we can continue with the burdens that men have put upon us throughout centuries, such as the burden of care, in addition to the burden of work. We also see emerging trends in this moment. Why is there a clear job separation? Men tend to work more in industry. Women tend to work more in service areas. However, it's important to talk about the post-pandemic era. And I feel a lot of pain talking about this because this has made the situation of women worse. The pandemic affected every country in the world equally. Some had more deaths than others, but those who died in the pandemic were mainly women. That is why we are now seeing how we can reincorporate ourselves to regain our jobs. And that is why I'm enjoying the terms that I'm learning from my co-panelists. We have some questions that we need to ask ourselves about the labor insertion of Latin American women after 2019. How did the pandemic affect participation of women in the job market? Women left their jobs en masse during the pandemic for many reasons. The first is that the majority of women had a lower salary than their husbands. This is something that happens to us. And I'm talking about families that are made up of a man and a woman. When women leave their jobs, it becomes a lot more difficult for them to re-enter the job market. We also need to ask ourselves, what are the professional barriers that are facing women who are living in poverty? Gaps in education. We have said that women are spending more years becoming educated. With the exception of women living in indigenous territories, that's where we see quite a big gap. And we also see this with Afro-descendant women and women who belong to historically excluded populations. We also need to note that education does not necessarily close inequality gaps. We can access a university education and even get a PhD or a doctorate. Despite this, we continue to see a gender gap between men and women. In service subsectors where women represent more than 50% of the workforce, we see that these were the people who are most affected by the crisis. And it is estimated that in 2020, women lost 18% of the jobs, according to ECLAC. Women also saw an increase in the care burden of unpaid labor. But when education centers and schools were closed, this kind of work, not just of care, but also of education, fell upon us. Here I will tell a little bit of my personal story because I think that this could apply to many women. My daughter's school was closed. She has Down syndrome. And all of the work that she had done had to be, in order not to lose out on her education, I also had to take care of this while I was carrying out the first humanitarian flight to take out those who were trapped in Europe, who were unable to get to their countries. We also see that women in Latin America spend more time carrying out domestic work. I'm going to tell you about an example from France, as the ambassador was here. In a country like France, a woman who doesn't work spends 90% of her time working, doing unpaid labor in the home, while a man who does not work dedicates 50% of his time to the same thing. And a woman who is looking for work dedicates 50% of her time to finding work, as opposed to a man who is looking for work, who dedicates 90% of his time to looking for work. All of this shows us that there are structural inequalities that have to do with cultural inequalities, which remain in countries where they have done so much, including countries like France. And we can see the same in Latin America. So what's happening? We see informal female work increasing. And we see that women are not contributing to their retirement plans. Women continue to be occupied by informal jobs or with short-term contracts. This is another issue that private enterprise needs to address. It's not the same thing to say, I'm hiring women, and that if I hire them, I'll renew their contract every 3 months, which makes it hard for us to achieve raises and promotions. When scarce jobs are given more to men than to women, we also see the increase of these gaps. Where we see poverty is concentrated among women, and when there is an unemployed woman, we can see that that is when the family is living in poverty. In conclusion, I want to talk a little bit more about the feminization and the impact of the insertion of women in the job market. In 2023, the Office of the UN Development Program of Latin America and the Caribbean presented a multidimensional poverty index with regards to women, which includes 5 dimensions and indicators. This shows how we're doing with regards to this topic in the region. 28% of women in the region live in multidimensional poverty. Multidimensional poverty is a way of looking at the cultural causes of poverty beyond poverty based on income. Multidimensional poverty, which is an indicator, which is to say it shows us which indicators are decided by each country and each region in order to observe the causes that keep people living in poverty. This includes unfavorable labor conditions, which is one of the indicators which is most indicated when we talk about multidimensional poverty. And with this, public policies and business policies should evolve at the same time that female participation in the job market does.
And that is where legislation comes in. Of the 32 countries of LAC, there is legislation to guarantee equality and to conclude with these poverty indicators, just to understand what we are dealing with. Discrimination on a gender basis was measured in the DR, equal treatment. Chile does measure discrimination, and it is the only country in the region to do so. Persons outside of the workforce for caregiving reason is measured by Costa Rica, and then we have the generals, that is childhood without care options, unemployment, lack of employment, educational levels, and human capital development. The private sector truly does need to be working hand in hand with the public sector in order to create the well-being that our nations need. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Paso la palabra.
I'll give the floor now to Vital Voices. How are all of you, my dear colleagues? I am very grateful to Ms. Alejandra Mora and the team for inviting us, and also it's a great honor to be with all of you and sharing this panel with you. I will be reflecting before I share some strategies that we've employed at our NGO on women's integration in the working world, and that is that, and maybe I'm being repetitive here, but at the end of the day, we're not being repetitive because everything is related with the other thing. And there is a challenge where we need to see where we have come from to understand where we stand and where we're going. And so, for me, this has been a great lesson. It's been a reflection, also given everything that we face currently. Not only challenges, but also the political panorama in Latin America and in the United States, as well as in the world today. Now, with regard to that, we are also talking about strategies and methods which are more effective in the longer term. And so a lot of what we have been doing in Vital Voices has that perspective in mind, and what we've learned from the women that we support as part of our programs in the long term, and the importance of partnership, of networks, of spaces just like this, where my colleagues have already talked about the fact that we can hold this dialogue and we can look at how everything is interrelated and how economic empowerment is related to violence against women, to gender-based violence, to the issue of caregiving, how that all has an impact, and how we have so many achievements as well in public policies and in terms of more organizations being part of women's movements, feminist movements, and real activities that are involving not only at the national and government levels and at the level of the social movements. We have a lot of challenges to overcome if we're going to achieve true gender justice. And we're working not only as women in over 184 countries. I will touch briefly on the importance of our network in terms of supporting women and their labor integration, and I'll also be talking about the importance of auditing, which Ms. Elizabeth Moreno also touched on, and I will talk about strategies that we have been implementing and our collaboration, as well as radical collaboration. And these are collaborations that are the most innovative, but took place because we are working with private companies sometimes, and also we might be working with a private company or maybe the State Department, and how that collaboration then leads to programs and projects which truly allow us to work with women to ensure that in the long term they have greater support for their integration into the workplace. Can you hear me? Yes? Very good. Okay, let's move around a bit. Vital Voices began in 1994, and we have some pillars that run through all of our programs. We support female leaders as well as organizations that are led by women. Now, with regard to that, the network is a source of support, not only social support, but it provides wisdom in terms of organization, in terms of financial organization, in terms of professional development. And so being part of that network brings us many opportunities, and even at the personal and interpersonal levels, as well as in terms of collective action. Being part of this network also allows us to be part of many different programs, and those programs include, as one pillar, the mentorship program. A mentorship might be intergenerational. It really depends on where you are in your career. It also could be to promote knowledge and learning, technical abilities, depending on your field. For example, we have been working a lot with women who want to work in tech and IT. And then we have that radical collaboration with private companies, where we have been working with organizations that are helping survivors of gender-based violence and trafficking in persons. They provide IT or tech training in order for them to be integrated into the tech working world. And at Vital Voices, we provide advice and services, and often we promote a relationship between this person and Google or Microsoft, but often they end up not getting that practical job that they really need in order to actually reach that new plateau. And so we do work to build relationships between the NGO and the woman who is going through a difficult time, but she also needs that economic independence above all, because in the long term she is going to need that in order to get out of that cycle of violence, and she can do that with smaller companies. She might work with FedEx or the healthcare system. The healthcare system also works with a lot of data. And this is just one example. We also have programs such as Vivid Grow, which works with female entrepreneurs and SMEs, providing connections between them and other women who have already been progressing in their careers in order to give them greater guidance or more training, or for example, if they're facing challenges that might be the same. We had a woman from the network whose name is Norjan Joseph, who is from Haiti, and she began working with food security because she was seeing a lot of women in Haiti who are living on the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and they were engaged in informal work. So she started to think about the fact that the food that we consume is often not a good source of income, but how can we change that? And so these women were not able to reach their full potential as far as their own companies. They were working and sustaining society. And so she worked with her NGO to address those women. And today she has another one called Micro Franchise. And that is because they got sick of being supported by small initiatives, by small level subsidies, and so they ended up becoming very dependent on those micro grants, and they were not able to actually make any sustainable progress. But with the micro franchise, they're able to support one another. And when you have a case like this of political instability that comes up, it doesn't mean that everything will be lost necessarily. That's just one example. Another example that I would like to share with all of you is that we work a lot with young women, and what you might achieve from this intergenerational collaboration. We have a program called Voices Inspire, Voces Inspiran, and it's something we do in Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala, Panama, and also with Argentina and Peru. These young women who are between 18 and 25 years of age have already begun their initiatives. They've already started to work focused on education, climate change, maybe in STEM, or maybe they are working on AI, or perhaps they are trying to integrate more young women in the university field outside of their own countries. And this brings them a lot of opportunities in terms of labor integration. And these young women are able to take classes or work on leadership, and they're also able to enjoy mentorship from women from the network. And so these women are at the very beginning of their profession. So just 2 more minutes are left. Wow. So that's one example. And then we have the issue of mentorship journeys, and in these mentorship journeys we have a woman who's already fairly advanced in her career who might get together with young women age 15 sometimes. And I don't know if you have the same experience that I do. I come from a migrant family. My parents came here through scholarships and then a consultancy with the World Bank. And so my parents obviously are very educated, but this is a new system. When I was young, I had my mom and dad as my mentors, and so sometimes I wonder how my career would have been today if I would have sat down with a woman, if I would have explained to her the challenges that I was facing, saying, oh, well, I'm really interested in dance, but I also love talking about politics. Maybe they would have given me some pointers and put me on a different path that at the time I didn't even know existed. So these relationships, and we're talking about relationships here, these partnerships, which are so vital, which we need to take greater advantage of, but at the end of the day, everything we've achieved is thanks to these networks, thanks to these partnerships. And to conclude, because I really don't have enough time here, thank you, I apologize. We would love to hear more from everyone, but unfortunately, we can't. At the end, I hope that everything that we have achieved, for example, when we build spaces like this, leads to sharing this knowledge, experiences, because at the end of the day, that helps us achieve a new plateau. That is what we are here doing today as women. And that is my conclusion. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Paso la palabra.
Thank you very much. And now we'll give the floor to Maria Claudia Camacho, who also is in a race against the clock. We'd love to hear from every single one of you for hours, but we can't. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you to the team for the invitation, and obviously thank you very much to all of the panelists, to my colleagues here who have been laying the groundwork for what I would like to share with all of you. And obviously we have seen changes in participation, education, overcoming all of the challenges. That includes inequality, salary gaps, and informality. And at the OAS, we believe that these challenges are something that we can overcome more easily with partnership and cooperation, and that's part of the Inter-American system. We have shared goals, shared standards, and solutions that we as a region can deploy in order to overcome this. And this is what the CIM has done throughout its history, and it's also what other fora do within the Organization of American States. And I would like to specifically share with all of you the debate underway with the Ministries of Labor. We had an Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor, and that's been in place for over 60 years, where they addressed the labor agenda for the region, our concerns, and what we can do in the framework of regional actions to overcome these obstacles. We have the declarations of these ministries of labor, and at the time, that goes back to the 60s, only 20% of women were employed at the time, and women barely even are mentioned in any of these declarations. But now the CIM has highlighted the importance of this topic, and now we see that women are at the very heart of our concern, that is gender equality. Just 3 weeks ago, the meeting was held in Bogota, and the topic was women's equality and empowerment. Was very present. Also, in the framework of the OAS, we have a group that brings together the main confederations of business and entrepreneurs in the region. We have CONFIEP in Peru and others in the DR, and these are all great examples. And also, we met just 3 weeks ago with these groups, and we have seen a very important shift in our focus. At the OAS-GA, they adopted the Inter-American Entrepreneurship Charter, and this is a pioneer document in positioning companies as fundamental stakeholders in fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, it has provisions on promoting productivity, investment, entrepreneurial growth, but it also has some very interesting provisions that I would like to share with all of you, because the member states were committed to strengthening gender equality and equity, as well as women's economic empowerment and development. And it talks about promoting public policies and frameworks to eliminate barriers in labor relations and developing an environment that promotes the employability, integration, and permanence of women's employment. And it also specifically speaks about the equitable view of non-remunerated caregiving work, access to high-quality caregiving services, and reconciling the work-life balance. So, of course, these are declarations. There are advancements in words, but they do lead to actions in the region. I think in the 3 minutes I have left, I would like to share with you 4 important messages from the work that we have been carrying out with the Ministries of Labor through this conference that I was telling you about, and with the private sector through this business commission. First of all, we have been promoting the regional commitment and national commitments to gender equality. But that's not enough. I think that what we really need to do is to ensure that the objective of gender equality be a cross-cutting issue in policies, programs, operations in public institutions, and also in the private initiatives. That is, it needs to be cross-cutting. We don't need to just look at gender as a silo issue. It needs to be a fundamental cross-cutting issue in all institutions to strike equality. And another message, or perhaps lesson, that we can share with all of you. This isn't anything new, of course, but I think it's worth underscoring it once again, and that is that policies and practices in businesses are not gender neutral. They never are. And their new tech is also not neutral, nor is AI, nor algorithms. This, of course, is a whole other can of worms, so we're not going to get into it here, but I think that we need to ensure that we look at the differentiated impact that this all has on men and women and how to address that. And we have the great risk of exacerbating gaps. And the third message is that we need institutional capacities and internal management in order to make gender a cross-cutting issue. We need people and departments within public institutions as well as companies to renew this agenda, to provide training and for all institutions in the area of gender. We have to have that institutional sustainability and capacity. It is fundamental. We've been spending a lot of time at the OAS work on the issue of gender with ministries of labor, and of course we can also see very important developments in the private sector here. Companies are a reflection of their environment, and obviously we have companies where the gender gap is larger than others. They might have companies with less female leadership or even presence, and then it's also true to see the opposite. Companies are a reflection, but they're also drivers of transformations in the reality of society, and so we can look at business practices. We've heard about many different strategies in hiring processes, promotions, having a gender perspective, a commitment to equality, to facilitate the work-life balance, to recognize shared social responsibility for caregiving work. And this is where we want to be transformative. And I will conclude with that. I might also say that the last is that learning obviously is related to the issue of caregiving. And this is something that for so much time has been the subject of studies and research, and now it is becoming part of the public and political agendas. That awareness that the unequal distribution of caregiving responsibilities and how women are overwhelmingly burdened by this responsibility, and that can explain their potential for promotion, work participation rates, what kind of jobs they have access to and where they remain employed. We need to look at the labor agenda and position it as we are doing right now, but we need to go beyond that. We also need to forge the path ahead and acknowledge this reality. And congratulations to this team, but we need to address the issue of caregiving in macroeconomic and productivity agendas. And I think that with that, I will conclude my remarks for this panel. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to say any more because I think that our time is running out. I will just say one thing, but because I think that the panelists have actually said it all. It's important to share with all of you, and thank you so much for this space. Thank you to all of you, Ambassador Justi. Thank you to all of the experts and panelists for sharing your experience and knowledge with all of us at the SIM, and thank you to everyone who is with us today. The last comments from Maria Claudia were absolutely perfect because they are a great segue to our next panel, where we will be looking at what we propose from the SIM so that the private sector can deepen its responsibility for care in the private sector. So we will hear from Alejandra Mora on work and principles, and then we will hear from the next panel of our special guests, moderated by our ambassador, Mayrin Cordero, who's the permanent representative of the Dominican Republic. And we will be with Ana Maria Chacahuanca, who is the president of the Association of Industrial and Businesswomen of Peru, former president of PYME Peru, and former vice president of CONFIAP, Maria Amalia Guillan, who is the director and coordinator of Women Entrepreneur Program from the Costa Rican Chamber of Commerce, Angela Franco, the chair and CEO of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, Isabel Quiroz, the executive director and Association of American Chambers of Commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we will get started with Secretary Mora and then hear from the panel. Thank you.
Bueno, voy a ser súper corta.
All right, I will be very, very brief in this presentation, and it seems to me that we just have so much to say because there's just so much going on when it comes to these topics, and so I will just try to give you a little bit of context for the many different topics that we have been doing as the SEAM, and I believe that the last comment that we will be sharing is what you have on your table. I think it's also very important. Thank you to the panel for all of the information and giving us a snapshot of where we stand and, of course, where we have all been working together and building this process. And so I just want to talk a little bit about caregiving as a structural issue. It's a structural issue that is historic, and hitherto we have seen it from the dimension in which we have been talking. And when you talk about women in the home with the presence of children below the age of 15, and that is why they're not able to take part in the working world, it reminds me of Ana Helena Chacon's words. She said that this is a determining factor of why women do not work. And additionally, a lot of these children are, there's a lot of young people who do not go to school, they do not study because they are at home taking care of somebody. This is very unfair and a great depiction of what's happening with women, how many spend more than 20 hours a week on caregiving and why they spend so much time on something non-remunerated. 70% of this type of work simply is not remunerated. And then the other thing that we have been trying to say, which is the impact that we are trying to build, and state how much this contributes to the GDP, and the response is between 16 and 27%. So let's sustain the economy, because women hold up the world, but we also need to hold up the economy. And so what are the documents that we have been contributing to this debate so that all of you can access them? First of all, we have establishing the global caregiving emergency, and it is an emergency. That means states need to take steps now, and yet they keep putting it off. The other document was caregiving is an investment, not an expense. And this is what my colleagues were saying. They were saying, look at our wallets. You need to see what we mean when we talk about investment. And then I wanted to just give you a general snapshot of what kind of components we've been taking into account with this study, and also the topic of the guide for implementation of shared responsibility with companies. Companies are very important to us. We need to speak with them and work with them, and so we need to sit down with them to work hand in hand to find a place such as multilateralism where we can draw a company's attention to this, and that is why I'm so pleased to be here with Ms. Choquehuanca and Ms. Franco, here with Ms. Guillen from the private sector, and also our colleague from AmCham and the private sector. They can also talk to us a lot about strategies, and here our beloved Ambassador Maria Helena, I'm sure, will talk about this, because what do we do in order to build a place like the OAS, where we have one partnership that leads to another? At the World Bank, we have a partnership there with Oxford, and we have been really driving all of this to make sure that it doesn't just reach the private world, but the private sector. And this is a huge challenge, but I think that we are up to the task if we work together. And what else can we say about caregiving? I think it's very important to look at some reference points. Please, when my 5 minutes are up, let me know. So, first of all, we established that this is a right, and I think that that is important. That is, if we don't talk about the fact that this is a right, we don't have anything to stand on, and so we need to ensure that it is a right and a guarantee. Secondly, that work carried out by women with caregiving is work, because work doesn't just mean goods and services. It doesn't just mean the productive sector, it means care as well. And so we have enormous implications here in this guide as far as our protection system, and everything that we build when it comes to these topics needs to be related to the 26 constitutions of our region that address well-being. And if we do not understand that caregiving is something just as important as the pension fund, education, or healthcare, we simply do not understand what we are dealing with when it comes to caregiving. The issue of shared responsibility, and that is why we are here with our guests, and we also need to bring men to the table to ensure that they are part of this process and truly committed as well, to see who's working on the process, who's collaborating with companies. We need to be able to state that caregiving is a right, and that is why we need to have these partnerships in all these spaces.
There needs to be a governance system because being an employee is not just about who has a wallet, but rather who is making the decisions for policies with regards to childhood education, the well-being state. So these systems of governance can become more complicated. And finally, we need to understand that if caregiving sustains community, life, society, it also sustains the economy, and it has economic value. And that is also a serious reflection on how to provide economic value. Then, after building that, we're thinking, okay, we need to build an alliance with private enterprise, and we have established, let's say, a guide for implementation, which is online, where you can go. And today we are just talking about 10 principles that I am going to go through quickly. We've been working on this for more than 30 years. And when we began developing policies with regards to equality 30 years ago, we need to remember that this is the same thing that we're working on today. And it's all about creating a society about equality and respect. This is an element that humanizes the world. This is caregiving, so that we can talk about what we're trying to do with regards to changes in society. We need to increase well-being. I think this is an ideological idea which has to do with a vision for how a state would be. The topic of sustainable development and growth. This is about how growth requires the human talent of women, because we're 50% of the population. This is an element that we are disregarding. If we are not here, then no one is talking about our topics. This has to do with more than just caregiving, has to do with training, with wages, because we don't have the same access to different roles, and that we add a different kind of value. The topic of flexible policies, all of this has to do with scheduling, leave, vacation. There are a large number of measures that we could do in this area. In order to do this, we need to be carrying out an immersive and continuous learning. this is an ongoing topic. We have recognition of economic value, which is integrating into the value chain and reflecting the strategic alliances that we are trying to build when we join together, and of course accountability, because this is the magic word. We cannot continue to do things without seeing the impacts that we have and being accountable to society. So with that, I am giving a very general panorama of what we are doing, and I would now like to give the floor to Mayalin. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? It's a pleasure for me to be here, and welcome to all of our panelists. Really, Secretary Mora has taken us step by step through the decalogue of co-responsibility of care in the private sector, and as she had expressed, commitment to this co-responsibility is vital. And that is what this meeting is all about. On behalf of the SIM, we need to understand a little bit more about the model inter-American law of caregiving, so that we have the commitment not just of the states, but also the commitment of the private sector with regards to caregiving, given that this is a role that impacts those who make up the majority of the workforce in our countries, which are women. That is why it's not a coincidence that the panelists today are women, because they have leadership positions in the business sector. They are the right people to tell us how they're working in their respective areas with regards to caregiving. If this is already a conversation that is being had, there are already caregiving policies at their companies, or perhaps this is a topic that still needs to be addressed and which needs to be strengthened with regards to its presence on business agendas. Today we are joined, as has already been mentioned, by Ana Maria Choquehuanca, who is the ex-president of PYME Peru and the president of the Association of Industrial and Businesswomen of Peru. She's also a representative of MIPEM Peru. She is a businesswoman with more than 25 years of experience in the public and private sectors, and she has already demonstrated her commitment to entrepreneurship and the economic performance not only of her country but of other countries in the region. She has had important roles in different ministries, the Ministry of Production and the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations. She is a versatile and experienced leader with a deep commitment to economic development and equality of opportunities in Peru. We are also joined by Maria Malia Guillen Solana, who is the director and coordinator of the Women Entrepreneur Program at the Costa Rican Chamber of Commerce. She's also a member of the board of ALAS, which is an organization which promotes the empowerment of women. She's an entrepreneur, founder of CCA Business Strategy, a Central American public affairs, regulatory, and legal firm. Her clients include Fortune 500 multinational companies in highly regulated industries in the pharmaceutical, food and beverage, financial, technology, and agricultural sectors. I would also like to introduce to you Angela Franco, who's the president and CEO of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. Previously, she was president and CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce between 2020 and 2024. Her commitment to support and advocate for chamber members demonstrates passion and vision to grow the organization. Franco joined the DC Chamber of Commerce during civic unrest and a global pandemic, and continues to move the organization forward. She's an experienced business leader who has strengthened and revitalized organizations, including the DC Health Benefit Exchange Authority, and the Greater Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We are also joined by Isabel Quiroz, who is Executive Director of the U.S. Argentina Business Council, where she leads the growth of this institution in a dynamic and rapidly evolving space to maximize the potential of the U.S.-Argentina bilateral economic and trade relationship. She also leads the Association of American Chambers of Commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean, where she supports the network of 24 American Chambers of Commerce in the region. This includes developing businesses in the leadership circle, providing strategic direction to the work of the association and the AmChams network throughout the Americas. Our panelists are definitely women with experience in the work sector and who have a vision of how the business sector can encourage shared responsibility and caregiving as a strategy for insertion and permanence of women in the work market. They will also talk to us about how they can apply these measures in productivity and how these impact the work environment and the well-being of their employees. I'm going to give the floor now to Angela Franco so that she can share her experience with regards to these topics with us. Welcome, Angela. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for jumping ahead, but I need to leave at 5:30. I'd like to thank you for including me in these conversations, which I love. As you've already been told, I'm from Colombia. I've been living in the United States for 23 and a half years. And that is where I also started from zero, as many have started. I was in a situation that brought me to the United States, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to, but when I came, I began to take advantage of opportunities. And the reality is that, for me, this has always been a passion of mine, not just to work with women, but also to open doors for those who need it. So when I think about the topic of financial independence for women and access to jobs, I see it as a possibility for entrepreneurship. And those are two ways of achieving financial empowerment. In the businesses here, I've always seen this in my head with three scenarios. First, we have small businesses who can't necessarily offer benefits to the people that they hire. And then we have larger businesses that begin to offer institutional benefits. And in the United States, especially in this region, which is the region I know best, we see legislation that requires businesses to provide benefits to their employees, especially those that have more than 20 employees. They need to provide them with maternity leave or things like that. And I think that this is something that, although there's still a lot to be done, I think that this is something that could be talked about with employers. The problem that I see personally has to do with immigration, because it's really about how people are not treated well, they're not paid well, and we all know that this is something that eventually we need to deal with. One of the things, there are a few more things that I wanted to share. There is something that for me is very important, and this is the process of training and support. Training within a company, and this is something that depends on all of us who are here, or all of us who are here listening. All of us have to do with this. If we are giving mentorship to someone, if we are helping women, if we're supporting women, because it's always easier to say, okay, this is what you need to do, and it's another thing to sit down and do it. And having the intention to do it is a very important part of this process. In addition to legislation, we also need to see this aspect of, yes, I'm going to do it. And this is what helps with the transformation of a single woman, of a community of women, with the support and the creation of a business. I also wanted to share with you a few statistics because I wanted to see how the hiring of women has grown with regards to big corporations. A McKinsey study in 2024 showed that in 2015, 29% of the workforce was women and 7% were minorities. We're seeing that there is a lot of room for women who are members of minority communities to grow in the United States. And with regards to the number of companies, those that are growing the fastest are those that are led by Latinos. And the businesses that are led by Latinas are those that are growing the fastest. And I think that there is a very big opportunity for making this more widespread and for working in collaboration with Latin American countries to support ourselves mutually. And I think that with this project, this is a great opportunity to identify and to begin to look for ways to carry out exchanges. And a lot of that has to do with virtual jobs, where a person can be working from their job and be with their children and their family. I really want to thank Alejandra to see how we can work together. For me, it's an honor to be here, to participate. It's also an honor to be representing the business sector here. But I think the work that I do is through support. It's through connecting people so that all of us can grow and be better. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Angela. Really, your experience in the business world and your openness to bringing that experience so that others can grow and advance is invaluable. So thank you for all of your contributions and success in your next event. Now it is my privilege to give the floor to Madam Ana Maria Choquehuanca, who is here from Peru to talk about her experience and how we can advance in topics of shared responsibility in caregiving with the private sector. Good afternoon to everyone who is here today. Madam Ambassador, co-panelist, I would like to thank you for allowing me to give this presentation. I have prepared it with a few statistics that I think are going to give a great snapshot of the reality that we have in Peru and in the business sector and the work that we're doing in the public sector as well and how we can connect everything together. Yeah. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank the SEAM and Alejandra Mora and the OAS for inviting me to participate in this event. This is something that really is something that we have hosted in Peru, but I could not miss this. Having been the Minister of Women has led me to think this is not just an obligation, it's a commitment, not just for my country, but for all of Latin America. This event, which joins us together today, has a strategic role in the regional and global structure to provide a balanced, safe empowerment of women, and this gives us a responsibility to promote gender equality, which is a fundamental pillar for advancing the world, but above all for social justice. That's a really important part of it. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I think that I would like to present a small analysis of all economic spaces in which this topic is being addressed. This is important because we come from the business sector. I've been a minister of my country twice, Minister of Women and the Minister of Production, which is what I've done my entire life because I come from the business sector, but it's important to set that context within each country with regards to these economic spaces. For example, with the OECD, what does it present? It presents a vision that says that if women participated in equal conditions in the economy, we could free up an unprecedented economic potential, adding up to $8 trillion to the world GDP by 2025, which would be a 26% increase. This is what they say, but this is what we have to do. We have to make a connection. On the other hand, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum promotes economic cooperation and growth. It's currently made up of 21 economies and represents a third of the world population, which represents 54% of the world GDP and 44% of international trade. However, we are facing urgent challenges, according to the Economic and Social Communication for Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific is the only region where the gender gap with regards to the labor market is deepening. Currently, only 43.6% of working age are actively involved in the economy, contrasting this with 73.4% of women. These are just a few statistics, but I think that this is very relevant, especially in this space. Of this percentage, 64% of women are trapped where? In the informal sector, in the vulnerable sector. We all know this. This situation perpetuates job insecurity with insufficient wages and a lack of access to fundamental rights such as social protection. This year, Peru is presiding over meetings, and as part of this process, it approved the ministerial declaration of the Forum of Women and the Economy of APEC, which indicates that it is essential to address the structural barriers that limit the economic participation of women, such as unequal distribution of caregiving work and paid and unpaid domestic labor. This means that this important forum, where all of the countries of Asia Pacific are participating, that we see that this is a relevant topic. There is commitment that needs to be made. There are papers that have been written, but with regards to action, how can we mobilize this action? How can we make this have really positive and immediate effects? There was also approval of a joint declaration between the heads of ministers of women and trade, which recognizes that the full and equal participation of women in the economy and in leadership positions, the growth of companies and entrepreneurship led by women contribute to economic empowerment of women and prosperity, as well as competitiveness and a greater well-being for society at large. My work in the private sector has made me lucky enough to understand both spaces. I think that there are a lot of times with the pacts that we adopt that we in the private sector are not capable of moving forward in order to have immediate effects. And that is what we need to do from the business sector. I really want to emphasize the fact that it's women's associations who should lead these processes. As a result, we need to face a structural struggle with deep historical roots, the unequal burden of domestic work that is unpaid, caregiving work, which disproportionately affects women. This is not a private issue. This is a barrier that is putting a stop to development in our economies. It erodes equality of opportunity, and it limits the full participation of women in productive life and in decision making. We need to be conscientious of the fact that we have inherited a division of labor along sexual lines that assigns to women responsibility for the home and caregiving, demanding personal sacrifice. For centuries, our values, norms, and even laws have reinforced a vision that confines women to the domestic sphere, penalizing them if they look for personal autonomy in decision making, bodily autonomy, political participation, or economic autonomy. So we still see that we are in a social environment that judges those who dare to break through the mold. Even we see the murder of women, which can be a response to the decision of a woman to break up a relationship or not return to it. 40 years ago, we saw that we replaced centuries of masculine leadership and we established equality as a main principle in relationships between partners and family members. However, we know that laws are not enough to transform our reality, and that is why machismo and patriarchal behaviors continue to remain in Peru and in the region. Data show us the truth. According to the Social Relations Poll of 2019, 52.7% of women believe that women should fulfill the role of mother and wife. That is what women think. That is the result of a poll of women, and women themselves believe. More than half of them, 52.7%, believe that our role should principally be that of mother and wife, and that we should leave our dreams to come after. Everything that we dream for, that we yearn for, comes afterward. That is half of the population that believes that. Many women are forced to leave paid work when caregiving responsibilities increase due to the arrival of more children or the needs of sick family members with a disability or who are aging. Then they face enormous difficulties in reinserting themselves in the job market. Obviously, once they leave, at the time that they leave, it's very difficult for them to resume everything that they have left behind. The statistics from Peru are alarming, and they remind us of the magnitude of this challenge. The statistics from other countries in the region are very similar, as we've already noted. The value of time dedicated to domestic labor that goes unpaid represents 20.4% of the GDP of our country. And of that value, about 80% corresponds to labor carried out by women. Every week, women in Peru dedicate almost 23 hours more than men do to domestic and unpaid labor. These are hours that represent a sacrifice that is not just economic, but it's also professional and personal. By 2021, more than 5.5 million people in our country had dedicated themselves full-time to caregiving work. Of this total, 72% did so without any compensation. 81% of these caregivers who went unpaid are women. In addition, 56% of caregiving women interrupted their educational trajectory, and 88% left work. That was during the pandemic. As we see, the statistics speak for themselves. It's clear that we are facing a situation that requires urgent action. It is time that we recognize, redistribute, and value the work that, while invisible most of the time, sustains our society. It's unacceptable and it's contradictory that in the 21st century, our societies are being deprived of the talent, energy, and creativity of more than half of their population. That's women. It's imperative to promote a real shared responsibility where caregiving is shared between all actors of society, family, government, businesses, and the community. In this reality, the private sector and businesses should take a proactive role, of course, in reorganizing caregiving, recognizing it as a structural challenge that directly affects the work inclusion of women, their professional growth, and their ability to have an influence in strategic decision making. This requires a change with regards to development with a business strategy which aims for businesses to prosper economically at the same time that they contribute to the social well-being of the communities in which they have a presence, based on the idea that business success and social progress are interdependent. 33% of profitability can increase In this way, businesses are also winning because they're investing in a more sustainable economic model, which is also dynamic and sustainable. This commitment with gender equality can free up the productive potential of women, and it's an investment in an economic model that is stronger and more inclusive. This allows women to contribute to the making of decisions that are strategic and creating a future that is more inclusive and sustainable. I want to give you a few examples to close. I want to emphasize the incredible work of Denver, the first Peruvian business which has gained global certification as a leader in gender equality. It also promotes equality of opportunities within the company, having reduced its wage gap to 2.93% compared to 27% which exists in the country. Another important example I want to mention is that of Jocelyn Malamud, the CEO of Grupo Biru, who leads a company as a world leader in the production of innovative and healthy foods. She has more than 17,000 employees, 50% of which are women. They promote gender equality at the company, ensuring that both men and women have the same opportunities for professional development within the company. This company has been recognized for the 5th consecutive year as one of the great places to work for production operations in Peru in 2024. And we have many more examples, but due to the limited time, I'm not able to comment on all of them. I just wanted to note that change in companies and from companies makes greater equality possible. I also think that we need to work towards a deep-seated change for equality and aspiration, towards a tangible reality which reflects rights, opportunities, and lives of millions of women. It's only then, upon freeing women of the structural barriers that have kept us behind, will we be able to achieve a truly free, equitable, and prosperous society for everyone. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. It is true that your experience from the public sector as well as in the private sector is just a whole series of examples that are very useful to all of us in learning positive lessons to move forward in this issue of care. And now I'll give the floor to Maria Malia Guillen to share her vision on this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to represent the Costa Rican Chamber of Commerce, and I'm a firm believer that when we have equality between men and women, we have economic development. And 15 years ago in the Chamber of Commerce, a group of visionaries created the Women in Business program, which sought to foment and build spaces to achieve women's empowerment and autonomy. And from the Chamber, we seek to provide the tools that business people need, such as access to credit, training, to create these spaces to share their experiences and challenges. We build public policies and we seek for businesses led by women to develop. In mid-July of this year, when in Costa Rica, I was very impacted by the number 38, and that is the number of hours that women in Latin America spend to caregiving and housework compared to 16 hours among men. And we were talking about how can we possibly compete in these conditions. And an attorney might say it's an imperfect market. We need to ensure that the housework is distributed equitably, and I'm part of the private sector where we have a very important role to play. All afternoon we've been talking about the importance of economic empowerment of women, and the impact that it has is economic empowerment when we make decisions, political decisions, family decisions, economic decisions to drive society, and finally with that empowerment, all of society is able to benefit. I was reading that when we achieve women's empowerment, we reduce poverty, because once women tend to invest what we earn in our family and community. Almost 90% of what we earn, we invest in that, compared to just 40% of what men earn. And so I'm going to refer to 3 principles that Alejandra was talking about, which from our program we've seen are very efficient when it comes to generating support for women. The first is that we need more women in leadership positions, because when we have women leading businesses, those leaders who know what kind of needs other women have will be responsible for driving changes and internal policies within the companies to make them more inclusive. That is how you drive change. Secondly, we have strategic partnerships. In the chamber, we have over 600 companies, large, small, and medium-sized. And so in order to drive inclusive policies and individuals dedicated permanently to these topics is something that you can do in a large company. But what do you do in SMEs when it comes to shared responsibility? And here, the issue of partnerships becomes very key, because I think that PPPs can incentivize training, building spaces for SMEs to be able to provide training and understand better policies. As part of the Costa Rican program, which is part of the IDB Gender Parity Program, and we've been seeking to share best practices that we have learned. And finally, there needs to be leadership from the highest levels of management, and when they understand the benefits, economically speaking, of investing in shared caregiving responsibilities, when they start to believe that this is how we can improve the organizational climate, that there are diversities among people, and that there's a lot of talent pool out there, that's when you start to see the changes. The private sector is at the vanguard of this issue, and often we don't need a law to do things well. We shouldn't wait for a law to be adopted in order to continue doing things right. We know that this is a difficult task. It can be controversial. And in Costa Rica, we have been working on some programs that are being implemented with companies on the issue of shared responsibility for caregiving. One of them is the Crece or Grow program, which provides payment in the private section where we give 20% of the cost of caregiving for minors, and the government will provide 55%, where the worker provides the difference. This is a pilot plan that will be launched next year, and from the chamber we are supporting it. Private companies have already understood that work without a work-life balance is unsustainable. I think that a lot of those of us who have been working in the private sector are following the global trends, promoting flexible work schedules, adaptive schedules, or other measures. And some companies have paternity leave programs, extended paternity leave even though, as some of the panelists have already stated before me, this needs to be deepened. I'm thinking now about a cultural change, and this, of course, is not an easy shift. In order for that shared responsibility to be effective, we need to include men. And I'm seeing just one man in a sea of women. We have so much more left to do. Men's participation is key if we are going to strike an authentic balance. We need to strengthen awareness campaigns. We need to promote active fatherhood. We need to recognize the essential role that each person plays in their family's well-being. And I will conclude with a reflection, because I think that we will only achieve a culture of shared responsibility for caregiving when we stop seeing caregiving as an individual task, when we start to see it as a shared responsibility that strengthens us and benefits us all. I staunchly believe that together, initiatives like the one we're working on today will drive us to changing minds and building a fairer, more productive, and humane working world. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, María Amalia.
Thank you very much. for this very valuable contribution of how leadership can influence and raise awareness, and bringing that to the table, the roles played by both men and women in being able to move forward in the issue of shared responsibility in caregiving. That's very important. Thank you very much for your reflections. And now I'll give the floor to Isabel to hear her vision on this topic. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, dear Secretary. Here, I've been thinking about this conversation and the day-to-day work. My grandmother had a wife who traveled. She said, wow, you're like a mother and father. I'm a mother. My husband travels. I'm both the mom and the dad. And this is a mindset. It's a mindset that we tend to have, and that is that women are responsible for caring. Women need to be taking care of everyone. Men can leave the house. Men go out and earn the money. And in the private sector, what are we doing? Obviously, the pandemic was an era that had a huge impact, and women were hit the hardest. But what's the difference between a woman and other people? And that is something that we need to look into. Of course, anyone needs to find a way to feed their children. Anyone needs to find a way to get ahead. And so this is what we ask of the private sector, that women start their own business. And so how could we sell something in order to get ahead? How could we build a business in order to build unity around the table, to support my partner, my husband? When we see this from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in Washington, and we, of course, represent over 3 million companies of all sizes, including SMEs. Actually, most of them are SMEs, and they are working in the supply chain, and women are the ones who are falling behind. This is a tragedy. So what are we doing? We have companies like UPS, DHL, which are doing their job in the region, specifically trying to figure out where women are. Is this an issue with connectivity? Is it time? Why is it that they are accessing other markets? And so my colleague here has said something very important, and that is that we can't just work with women. We also need to involve men, because we don't live in silos with just men or just women. No, and from the AmCham, we have been trying to drive this conversation. When we have events at the chamber, particularly with LAC, we don't have a panel. We invite women to the panels. We need to have a balance. And we also can't have only women as moderators here, because we're not the only experts when it comes to these issues. And this is something we've been driving in the chamber and in the region in order to ensure that this is something equitable for all. And so we are trying to hold this conversation. And we know that, going back to my grandmother is not someone who's going to change, but my daughters will. I know that my cousins will. If we are able to make an investment, we need to do so from the way we teach our children from a young age. And when we see women as someone who has evolved from a time when her role was confined to the home, now women also need to not only care for their family, they also need to bring bread to the table. They need to be a leader. And men still don't have to do that. Last year, there were some studies that were carried out, and some articles that were very illustrative. Are women leaders born or made? Can't women demand more? These titles of these articles, what does this mean? Why is this a conversation that we are having? When we look at the role of women who are executives, I remember the SMP, they have less than 74% of executives of women in leadership positions. Of the 100 largest companies, only 9% are led by women. 9%. That is just a drop in the bucket. And so we still even though we've seen improvements, we've covered a lot of ground, but we have a lot left to do, particularly in the executive area. And so how can we from AmCham ensure that there's flexible working schedules in the post-COVID era that gives us a lot of flexibility and adaptability? But from 9 to 5, where are my children? Who are they with? I enjoy that benefit of flexibility, but not everyone does. And so we need to look at what's being done in the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. But what happens to those who have, let's say, their local jewelry shop? How are they going to access these benefits? And so we need to work with these chambers. And we manage 24 chambers in 24 countries around LAC. We need to look at policies and how we can facilitate trade, digital issues, healthcare systems, and we have to look at social responsibility and gender issues there. But in each of these areas, we need to look at gender as a cross-cutting issue, as was stated in the other panel. This is vital because without that productivity, we are losing a huge amount of ground. And so we need to look at our American companies, and in the region, these are some of the companies with the greatest gender diversity in the region. And we have been working with our AmChams in order to broaden that role and work with SMEs. From the AmChams, I know that we have a partnership with We Connect, Vital Voices, and other organizations that are part of this conversation. But if we look at this from the perspective of the chamber, this is an issue of security, safety. We might look at it as security in the region, but we also have to look at women's security. So we need to address these issues, ensure that they're addressed equitably and inclusively to promote equity for all, particularly women. But then we can work with all of our companies, and we are doing that already. We are seeking more policies, regulations, and laws. But how can we work with multilaterals, with other organizations? How can we work hand in hand with them in order to reinforce this conversation? And from the chamber, we have been promoting a program called Women Taking the Lead. And this is something where we've been working with 100 female business leaders on how to move forward, how to get ahead, and working in the labor area of things. How are we closing this gap? Because closing the gap for us is breaking the glass ceiling. That's one side of things, but we also need to build a ladder. The ladder right now is not working, and so how can we make sure that it exists for other women? So this, again, needs to be a cross-cutting issue in all of our policies. And we know that from the region, we have been working arduously here in Washington with all of our AmChams. And of course, it is a conversation that we have been having with so many women for the last 10 years. We have women in the NGO executive boards. How many women are part of a company's executive board? It was always just one or two. And so we see that this figure hasn't changed. Maybe there's been a tiny improvement, but we're not there yet. And so, yes, things are better, but we do need to move forward. And so from the chamber, we know that we cannot stop talking about this. We can't let women fall behind, and we need to build the space for women, men, and companies, multilaterals, organizations, all to come together and ensure that we are addressing this issue. I am delighted to be here with all of you having this conversation today. Thank you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Isabel. Gracias por...
Thank you very much for sharing that experience, Isabel, working with the AmChams in our region. And I believe that indeed, as we already heard here, we need to talk to companies. We need to talk to the private sector. We need to talk with PPPs. That is vital, but not only from the perspective of programs for infrastructure and logistics, but also in order to address topics which touch all of us, men and women. The issue of caregiving is an issue that has been growing in political agendas, but in the private sector and in the working world, that partnership, that view from the private sector is, of course, very important if we are going to strengthen development. As all of you were speaking, I took some notes that I would like to share with all of you to close the panel. And it is the following. 1, the importance of training for women and support between women in order to achieve progress. 2, to take advantage of spaces for women to continue growing. And Angela was talking to us about the fact that from her perspective in the United States, there are still places with room to grow, but in those spaces we might also share that experience in our region and apply it to LAC. We see the experience of female migrants who are extremely vulnerable, and we might bring that experience to our own local realities. Thirdly, the importance of women's participation in equal conditions in the working world. We need to break down cultural barriers and practices which are obstacles to both men and women and their social development. We need support from the private sector in organizations for caregiving to promote prosperity and social responsibility. Also, we have highlighted today that investing in women means investing in greater economic development. Economic development is closely intertwined with men's and women's equality, and economic empowerment of women has a direct impact on poverty, and it means that we can continue breaking these cycles of poverty which have an impact on so much of our society. As I stated earlier, the importance of PPPs and strategic partnerships, the private sector, the governments, academia, civil society, all of this work, this joint vision is what will drive us forward day in and day out. And as Isabel said, this conversation has not concluded today. It will not conclude tomorrow either. We must continue moving forward to reach progress. And finally, what Maria Amelia was saying about the importance of men's participation in spaces like this and awareness raising, not only for women, but we also need to have the support of men in these processes, and to see that the issue of caregiving, as Maria Amelia was saying in her final reflection, is a shared responsibility. It affects all of us. We have to work to ensure that caregiving is part of the progress that we are able to achieve in women's advancement as well. And I think that with that, we can conclude the second panel. It's been such a pleasure to share with all of you, and also it's been a great opportunity to work with SEAM and reflect together on such a vital, sensitive issue for our societies. Thank you very much.
Gracias, embajadora.
Thank you, Ambassador Cordero. Thank you to all of our experts and panelists. Thank you to everyone who has been with us all the way to the end. And I think that now we need to bring men into the fold. So thank you very much to all of you who've been with us online. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to those who have been participating with us. Thank you.